Hi, good morning. I hope that you are able to hear me. Um, if you can hear me, just give a thumbs up or something in the chat box so I know that you can hear me. Okay, okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started with today's masterclass. Hopefully some other people join in. Um, Also note that the session is recorded, so if you want to go back and look through it, or if you have to leave halfway through, then the recording is still available to you to assist you. Okay, so the main purpose of the session is to basically go through the assignment just to help you understand, or if you have any questions about it, or any concerns or uncertainties, I can go through it and we can work on it together. So, yeah, it's just basically to go through the assignment and to ensure that you are aware of everything um, that is required of you and how to answer certain questions. Um, yeah, just to give you a deeper understanding of everything. So, I'm going to go ahead and start. Always remember, okay, first of all, I hope uh, you know where to find your assignments. So if not, under student material, if you type in your module code, you should find your assignment under there. Okay. When you open your assignment, you have a cover page. Please read through this because sometimes they do have different instructions on here. I know some students just overlook this page, but just make sure you read all the instructions just to make sure that you've covered everything. So, for example, some of the instructions here is this is an individual assignment, so you're doing it on your own, and this is known information, but we shouldn't be copying from any original sources. So that means even if you reference something that you've taken from a source, you shouldn't be taking it word for word. You should always be paraphrasing. So always make sure that you do put it into your own words before you actually put it into your assignment. And try to stay away from paraphrasing tools and also stay away from AI platforms because they, even though students like to shortcut and use these things, and you shouldn't be doing that, they also generate incorrect answers most times. So you don't want to take a chance and rely on that because not only will Turnitin and pick that up, but also just in general, your information will not be, will most likely not be correct. So try to stay away from that. Trust your own ability to paraphrase, use additional sources. So this assignment does require you to use additional sources, and that means things like different research articles. Now, I know that there are students that um, don't know how to find research articles or not or that are not fully equipped with um like on websites to go to and platforms to go to. So if you are finding it difficult to find research articles to get information from, all you have to do is type in whatever you're looking for, and then after that, just say research article. So if you're looking for operations management definition, you type that out, and then you just say research article after. And quite a few research articles will show up. Some of them are free, some of them are not. That's why we do like you to use like EBSCO-host and things like that. Um, but if you just want like a shortcut to that, you can always just type in research articles and it will come up. Yeah, and of course you have to reference that as well. So using more sources in your assignment gives it more credibility. So you want to have quite a few sources just to support the things that you're saying. So instead of only using your textbook, or only using slides, or only using lecture notes, you want to also use additional resources. So use your textbook, but elaborate using research articles. So make sure that you do that. And that brings me to the referencing aspect. So another very, very, very important aspect to doing your assignment is the referencing part. And it's so easy to forget to insert your references when you maybe you think like, okay, at the end, I'll just put all my references in. But it's better to insert your references as you are going along. So by now, hopefully, you know how to in-text reference and you also know how to create a reference list. If not, um, we can do like a separate referencing refresher, um, like closer to the time, or maybe your lecturers will do one with you. But always read the referencing rubric sheet. So again, some students will overlook this, but this is how we assess your referencing. So for example, if you have minor errors, so you have your references, you have in-text, you have all of that, but you have minor errors. This is a 5% deduction. Now, minor errors will be your little things like any inconsistencies. Maybe you put a full stop in the wrong place, or maybe you continuously are doing this. So, some students, when they have an in-text at the end of a sentence, they tend to put um, a full stop at the end. So if it looks something like if you say operations management and then you are putting your in text, some students will put a full stop and then they will say, um, let's say Walter 2022. That would be incorrect. Okay. So this would be the correct version of that. So your full stop always goes at the end of your sentence if your in-text is at the end. So just make sure little things like that is corrected because careless mistakes as such can get you a deduction of 5%. And if you consistently do this throughout your assignment, that's also not good. So try to go through your assignment again and make sure that this is not the case. Okay, and then other little inconsistencies that can get you a 5% deduction is if you have errors in your reference list. So maybe you were not using the correct reference list style that was required of you. That can also get you a 5% deduction. So just be aware of that. And then major errors will be like maybe you didn't insert an in-text somewhere where you needed to, or maybe you you don't have in-text at all and you just have a reference list, or maybe you have in-text but not a reference list. So those are major errors that can get you a minus 10%. Now, sometimes your whole entire paper can be flagged if the majority of your paper is not referenced. So please just make sure that you reference and then go back and check if those references are correct. Um, and I'm sure, like, if you asked your lecturer to just have a look at the references just to see if the style is correct, if the placement is correct, that he or she will assist you. So it's always better to be safe because minus 10 and minus 5% is a big deduction. Okay, so read the reference page because it's going to help you understand how that is done. Okay, and now moving on to the assignment instructions. Okay, so again, make sure that you do have additional research. Remember, it's an assignment for a reason. Like you get to take it home and complete it, which means you are expected to have additional sources, not only your textbook. And it also gives more depth to your answers. It shows that you actually went out of your way to show a better understanding, to support your examples, to support existing theory, all of those things. So you want to make sure that you do have additional research. Okay, so it does say here you are required to do that. So make sure that you do that. You also have a case study. And all the questions that follow are relating to this case study. So, in that case, make sure that when you are answering your questions, you relate it back to the case study. That is important. Okay. So, when we mark, we usually look if there's a relation to the case study. So if you've used other examples, that's fine too. If you want to explain a little bit more using a different example, that's okay. But always form a relation back to the case study because every question does ask for an example from the case study or to show application with regards to the case study. And that brings me to the next point where we need to balance out our theory and our application component. So theory relates to the content aspect. So this is like the work from the textbook, your lecture slides, the research articles, all of that. Like what is operational management? This is what it is. Okay. The application component deals with giving some kind of example to showcase your understanding. So you are taking your information and you are applying it to a real life situation to show that you actually understand what this is. So, if you are saying an operations manager overlooks the transformation model, your application of that will be I'll use Lint because Lint is in the case study. You would say that Lint's operational manager overlooks the process of so and so of inputs being transformed into outputs, and you'll use specifics of that. So what are the inputs, what are the outputs, what are the technical processes that are involved with that? So that will be taking theory and relating it directly to a case study or the example that they not the example but the business in the case study or whatever they give to you. So you always want to find a balance between two. Don't only do theory and don't only do application. Always do a good amount of both. Now, when it comes to application, you have to be careful that it's not very generic. So you don't want your application to be, yeah, Lens operational managers will overlook the transformation process. That's very generic. The only thing that you're specifying is Lent. Okay. So you want to be specific. You want to say, what is Lens operational manager doing? Um, what are they overlooking? What specifically are they overlooking? If you are saying they're overlooking inputs being transformed into outputs, what are the inputs? What is being transformed? Okay, so that is getting specific. So remember, if your application can be applied to anything, any scenario, then it's not specific enough, and you need to then break it down. Okay, so application is there to show your understanding. So always have it. Okay, and then always remember to reference your theory, reference anything that you've taken from a textbook, from a case study. If it's like a different case study that you're using, if you are using research articles, okay, you reference everything. And then also you have an essay question towards the end of this. You do have an essay question. So just remember there is a word count involved. Now they don't tell you this in the question. So you need to remember this for yourself when you're looking through this assignment. Make a general note for yourself that it is going to be between 900 and 1,000 words. Okay, and lecturers do pay attention to the word count, so please don't go above that. Yeah, we have word counts for a reason, so always try to stay within that. Okay, it's very important. And then just indicate what your word count is, just to make it easier. Okay, so here is your case study that you have. So you have a nice long case study based on Lint, South Africa. Okay. Um, It is quite long, but read the case study because it has lots of good information. Maybe highlight some things that you think are important, but it is quite long. Okay, pay attention to this as well, like this little Facebook snippets, because that also becomes important in your assignment. And then they do give you like the source. So if you want to go and read more about it, then just there's two links here that you can go into and you can read more about it. And then it continues. So it gives you a lot more information about the farmers and the communities. Okay, so this really dives deep into Lindt chocolate. And now we get into the questions. Okay, so I hope like the instructions are pretty clear to you guys, and so far you're all good and you are following. Um, okay, so let's break down each question. So question 1.1. Now, this whole assignment is out of 100, and as you can see, the questions hold quite a large amount. So you want to make sure that you write enough for each question and not just theory, but like I said, theory and application. So you want to make sure you're hitting all the points to get that full mark. So in our first question, you are asked to identify and describe the communication model, okay, that is used by Lindt. So you see, they are also referring to the case study, which means when we are now using an example, we need to also refer to Lindt. Okay, so don't use an example from a different business, use it from Lindt. Now, when we are asked to identify and describe, there's two parts to this. Identify is the first one. So when we are asked to identify something, it means we need to specify. So we need to give a name, we need to state something. Um, and in this case, remember we get two communication models. We have our linear model and we have our convergence model. So I don't know if you remember this when you did your communications learning unit, if you are there yet. But those are our two types. So you are asked to identify which one is presented or used by Lindt. Okay, so identify that communication model. And once you've done that, you need to describe it. Elaborate on it. When you are asked to describe something, you are asked to provide a lot of detail about it. So say everything that you know about this communication model that you've chosen, and you are going to speak on it using examples to support your answer. So use your textbook to frame out your theory. So go to the communication section, go and identify which communication model you think Lindt is using, write about it, go do your additional research, add more context to your theory, and then provide an example to support the answer and take the example from Lindt. Okay. Um, so for this question, it's 15 marks. So we can assume that 10 marks of this is our theory, and we can assume that 5 marks will be for our application. So you want to give quite a lot of information, and that's why I say when the word says describe, you go in deep detail. You give all the insights of the communication model, you give like your basic facts of the communication model. It's really going to elevate your answer. It's going to give it more context, and it's also going to help you when you're providing your example. Okay, so what is the communication model? State that and then elaborate on it. And then what in the case study is telling you that this is the communication model? Like what makes you say that? Okay, so that's going to back up your answer. So please write enough. I know from the previous assignments it's very common that you write maybe a 5 line paragraph. Please write a little bit more than just 5 lines because we need to hit a 15 mark. Um, yeah, we need to hit 15 marks. So in order to achieve that, you need to actually have quite a lot of theory. Okay, so If you do have questions, just type it in the chat box, and then towards the end, we will look through them. Okay. Okay, so 1.2, we are being asked to describe any 5 barriers to effective communication. So these are our keywords. Okay, describe any 5 barriers to effective communication, and we know that it's to do with lint. Okay, and then the second part of this is to include an example for each barrier. Okay, that's also a keyword. So we're providing examples for each barrier and not just one of them, or not just a general. Um, so you can pick any 5. Remember, not all of them will be applicable to lint. So that's why you wouldn't just go to your textbook and select any 5. It's going to require you to do some deep searching. So you look at your case study, you will look at lint as a business, and you will look at which 5 barriers out of all the different barriers that you get is a possible barrier um, that will hinder communication for lint. So once you've picked those 5, you're going to describe them. That's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to describe each barrier. When it asks you to describe, remember what I said, you have to provide details. Okay, give an explanation, give insights, give a deep explanation of each barrier. And then we need to refer back to lint for an example. So because this is a 10-mark question, we can assume 1 mark is for the explanation of each barrier and 1 mark is for an example. Okay, right. It's just an example. So 1 mark explanation, 1 mark for the example. It must relate to lint. So remember a trick to this as well, if you're finding it difficult to relate it back to the case study, use the business name. Use the business name, use different elements and aspects that they are talking about in the case study and put that into your answer, because it creates or it shows that you are making the effort to relate it back to the business, and that answers the question. Okay, so try to always do that. Okay, and then your answers should be very specific. So if you are saying, for example, if one of the barriers is poor listening skills, you need to be specific, like discussing poor listening skills and what listening skills are, that's okay. But how is it realistic to the scenario? What specifically um, are you saying about listening skills in terms of communication with Lint? Okay, so you have to be very specific with that in order to get your mark. Okay, so we will go through some content so we can look at different barriers. Because I'm not sure if you guys have gone through any of that, but we will look at them. Okay. Always remember to break down your question so that it's not overwhelming, because if these weren't highlighted, it does look like a lot that you have to do. So try to break down the question on your own, use highlighters, print your assignment out. It makes it easier to ensure that that you're answering everything. Okay. Then 1.3. So 1.3, we are asked to differentiate between goods and services. So we need to refer to 3 points. Okay, so when you are giving a comparison between goods and services, you need to have 3 really good aspects within each that show that they are different. So when you are asked to differentiate, remember, you need to identify and explain the differences. So what is it about a good? What is it about a service? Highlight the distinct different characteristics. So for example, tangible and intangible. Okay, that would be a distinctive difference between the two. Yeah, so just make sure that you have 3 of that. So this is 10 marks. 3 marks for your 3 points for goods, 3 marks for 3 points of services, and 4 marks for the application aspect. Okay, so you're going to go back to the case study and you're going to draw examples from the case study. What is a good? What is a service? And how does it differentiate? When you are setting out your answers, always start with a theory and then make your way into application. Okay, instead of starting with an application and then going into theory. Um, when you start with theory, it forms the foundational understanding. It shows the market that you have a good understanding of what this concept means, and your application thereafter is going to show that you know how to apply it. It just gives you a more deeper understanding. So that's how you should structure out your answers. Okay. So yeah, that's easy 10 marks because it's quite simple, the difference between the two, and then getting the answers from the case study, that should be simple as well. I hope everyone's good so far. Okay, 1.4. Discuss inputs in the transformation process. So this is also quite a simple question, but again, to have a you are asked to discuss. So there should be a discussion here. So whenever you're asked to discuss something, again, it's to give an in-depth theory. It's to discuss all the possible points surrounding your inputs. So any information that you have that shows what an input is, different kinds of your inputs in the transformation process, include that. Okay, again, 15 marks, which means 10 marks will come from your theory, and then 5 marks will come from your application aspect. So if you show that you do have an understanding of what an input is, what kinds of inputs you get, if you do remember from your transformation model from the operations management learning unit, you have two different types of um, two different types of input resources. So just go back to that and look at what those two types are and then elaborate on those. Okay, so again, we will go into detail with some theory after this so that you do have more of an understanding. But for now, I hope this question does make sense. And then again, you're going to go into the case study and you're going to look at what would lens inputs be. So what inputs do they have? Remember, inputs are not just your raw materials, okay? It's anything that goes into a transformation process. It can be information, it can be capital, it can be human resources, it can be anything. So it can even be customer feedback, okay? So go and look at what are the possible inputs for Lent and elaborate on those, explain it. So don't just say, like the cocoa bean, for example, because that's not enough to get you 5 marks. So you want to elaborate on that. What do you mean? Like, what is the input? Okay, and then I hope that makes sense and everybody is good. 1.5, you are being asked to explain the concept project and outline the 4 broad concepts of projects. So again, refer back to your project management learning unit. Okay, when you are asked to explain something in a question, they basically want you to look at also a discussion. So explaining what it means, draw on some facts about what a project is. And your textbook does define the project concept really nicely. So you can even go back to your textbook, um, paraphrase what a project is. And also you can do additional research. So you can go to a research article and you can also find the definition within that. And you can also provide that as well. but always remember to reference and reference your textbook as well when you're using your textbook. Okay, so two parts to this question. We are explaining the concept project first, and then we are outlining the four broad categories of a project. Okay, so if we have to break this question down, you start off with your explanation of what a project is, and then you're going to start explaining your different categories. So again, we will go through this, but you do have four different categories. You want to explain those four different categories. Okay, state what they are actually. Always state what they are, because remember, you do get marks for simply stating something. Okay, so state, don't just explain, state and then explain. Okay, and then lastly, give examples from the case study. So if you are saying, if you're giving a project category, explain how Lent can, like, how does it relate to that project category? Then when you're choosing your other project category, how does Lent relate to that project category? Okay, so you're going to take all four categories and you're going to provide an example for all four. I know it sounds complicated, but I promise you it's not. Once you go through the actual theory of it, you'll see how easy it is. You'll see how easy it is to actually find examples in the case study. Okay, so that's why I said always go back to your case study and maybe highlight important things. Makes it so much easier to find your answers. Okay, and now we have an essay question. So essay questions are, they're very nice actually, because this is where you can actually get a lot of your marks. It's 25 marks. Okay, so don't be afraid of an essay question. Remember, the maximum amount of words that you can use is 1,000 words. So don't exceed this. Always, always, always remember to in-text reference. Firstly, you need to in-text reference everywhere, but especially in an essay, because sometimes you forget, or sometimes you only reference at the end of an essay, or sometimes at the end of a paragraph, and you don't want to do that. In-text references means it is within the text. So be safe, reference everything that comes from another source, everything, because remember, it's not your own information. Sometimes even an example needs to be referenced if you've taken it from someone else's explanation, or if it is based on a theory, which is also not your own theory. Okay, so that would also need to be referenced. So some people like to say, but what if it was my idea, or what if I remember the definition of demand planning from high school or something, but it still came from somewhere. So you still have to in-text reference. Okay, so some things that we need for our essay is as follows. So in just an overview, we are discussing demand planning. Okay, so demand planning, if you remember what it is, um, remember how we have a forecast. So a forecast is when we make a prediction of what is likely to happen for something specific. Say it is for demand. The demand planning helps us to put that forecast into an action plan. So how can we use the information that we've received, um, and we put it into a plan? So that is what we are discussing when it comes to demand planning. Okay, now in your essay, you are expected to have a brief introduction, body, and conclusion. Okay, now I don't know if you remember from high school writing essays. When you have your introduction, you need to state introduction. Okay, so have a title that says introduction, and then have a like maybe 3 to 5 lines of a general opening. Your introduction needs to be very brief. So you shouldn't have any heavy content in an introduction. It should just give the reader an idea of what to expect in the essay. Whatever you do, do not use AI to generate this essay for you. Okay. Please do not use AI to do this for you because the likelihood of you getting it correct is very, very minimal. So please just use your own skills, your own knowledge, and you'll be fine. So have the title introduction, have a brief description of what to expect in the essay, and this is very, very general. So I don't know if you would remember from high school, but say you are discussing operations management, for example. Your introduction should be, sometimes it's even just a definition, or sometimes it's a fact about operations, or sometimes the writer just introduces a topic by saying, this essay is going to unpack these concepts that are intertwined with operations. We're going to be having a look at the transformation model. We're going to be having a look at the different types of goods and services. Okay, so that is not going in detail, but it's giving us a general overview of what the rest of the essay is going to be about. So in your introduction, if you look at the other bullet points, they are like what you need to include. Okay, so an explanation of demand planning and then the demand planning process. So in your introduction, maybe discuss how you're going to elaborate on these two. Okay, so something to that effect. So it can be anything of your choice, but just keep it brief. It's not it's not a very long, your introduction should not be longer than, it shouldn't even be the length of a paragraph. It should be half of that. Okay, so keep it short, between like 3 to 5 lines, or even shorter than that. So maybe 3 lines. Your body of your essay is the bulk of your essay. So you don't have to necessarily write body, but if you want to, just to be safe, you can. But instead of writing body, you can have subtitles. So you can have, and a nice way to do this is to use the titles that they give you, because it's easier, and it's easier for the marker to recognize that you have included it into your essay. So if you decided to change these titles, then it can be a little bit confusing. Okay, it's not to say that that the marker won't recognize it, but it's just a lot easier if you just use what they've given you. And moving back to AI, if you used AI to generate this, what would happen is AI would change the information and put it into different words. So that is why I'm saying don't use AI, because firstly, it will be quite evident that you did, and you can get flagged for that. So don't use it. Use these titles and use the theory that you have, and you'll be fine. Okay, so explanation of demand planning is something that you need to include in your essay. So have it as a title and then elaborate on it. So give your explanation of what demand planning is. Okay, what is it? What does it entail exactly? What does it mean? What does it mean for Lent? Okay, so what you can do is you can have your theory and you can have the application of that directly after, or you can have the explanation of demand planning and the demand planning process, and then lastly, you can have the application to Lent. So that is sometimes how I write my essays. I'll do all the theory explanations first, and then lastly, I'll tie it into the case study, because it's just a nice way to wrap things up and to show your understanding. But I do know some people like to intertwine it into each. So to show little bits of understanding of each and then wrap it up at the end. So you can do that as well. In your explanation of demand planning, you can give a nice explanation and you can give a little example, or um, anything that can tie you into the case study. And then your next one is the demand planning process. Okay. So again, you need to elaborate on what the demand planning process is. Why is it important? Maybe discuss the different steps of this in detail. Okay, but remember your word count. Always refer back to the word count and see if you are on track. And then lastly, again, this can be a title. You don't have to say clear application to Lint. You can just say application to Lint South Africa, okay, as a title. Make your titles bold, underline them so that we know that it is a title, okay? And then your application to Lint is basically going to be you applying demand planning to Lint. So you know your demand planning process? Take that process and apply it to Lint. So even if you don't get information exactly on what Lint's demand planning process looks like, when you don't know that information, all you have to do is go to the steps and then apply those steps to Lint. So if you start with the forecast for your demand planning process, then talk about how Lint will most likely start with a forecast of past sales, okay, or maybe historical data that they have. So that is how you can link the two because you're not always going to find specific information like their demand planning process, you know? So you're going to have to tie it in all on your own. And you're going to have to say how or what you think Lynn's demand planning process would be. But of course, you're not going to use the word I think. Okay. Um, yeah, so hopefully you guys are okay with this. And remember what I said, use additional sources, especially in an essay. Now you do get a rubric for this. So if you like scroll all the way down your assignment, there is a marking rubric here. Now I highly suggest that you actually use this when you're writing your essay because what this does is it also gives you an understanding of how we are going to market and what we are looking for. Okay, so if you look at this first aspect, which is, I don't know if you guys know how to read a rubric guideline or if you've ever been through it before, but you have different things that you are marked on. So, first of all, you have your essay structure. Your essay structure is basically the overall of your essay. So is it clear? Is it concise? Is there relevant information involved in it? Are there headings? And this is why I'm saying to you, include or when you have your titles and your headings, make it bold, underline it so that we can see that it is a heading. We can see it quite evidently. Okay. Now all of this is 5 marks. So if you don't have titles and if it's not very concise, it's not engaging, you don't get the full 5 marks. So that is why that's why I'm being so specific with an introduction because you want your introduction to be very captivating. You want it to entice the reader to keep reading. Okay, so think about yourself. Think about if you are writing or no, reading a journal article, and if the first paragraph is not exciting to you, you're probably just going to close the page, right? So you don't want that to happen in this case. You want your introduction to be very captivating, very inviting. You want to invite the reader to read the rest of it. So that's what you need to aim for. And then a conclusion to wrap everything up. So after you're done with your entire essay, your conclusion is very similar to an introduction in a way that it's both brief, okay? But your conclusion is ending everything. So don't really use the words in conclusion, okay? Because you're using the title you're using the title conclusion. So you don't want to say in conclusion. But you want to tie everything in really nicely. So maybe bring everything to a closing. You can mention the demand planning process again, or just basically your conclusion is just to remind the reader of what they have read. So, how you structured your whole body of your essay, bring all of that into 3 or 4 lines. Okay, bring it down to 3 or 4 lines. So, everything you discussed, you are now bringing it to like a little summary at the end so that the reader is just reminded that is the purpose of a conclusion. Okay, so both of these need to have relevant information. So, because you are being asked to discuss demand planning, your introduction and conclusion need to have relevant information on demand planning. So you shouldn't be giving information on something else entirely, but more specifically, demand planning. Okay. And then, yeah, and then just if you are able to show that there's flow in your essay. So from the one section, you're able to flow into the next section, and from that section, you're able to flow into the next section, then that is really good as well. So you want to aim for this last little table, not the other two, because the other two is really low marks. So if you want full marks, focus on the information on your far right. Okay. Then we have the knowledge aspect. So this is the body of your essay. So your explanation of demand planning and also the demand planning process and how you answered that and what information did you give. Now, if you look at how this is being marked, we are looking for key points of the theory that is well explained. So you are giving relevant theory, and this is exactly why I said to you guys, don't use AI to generate your essay for you, because AI is not going to hit the relevant points that you need. AI doesn't know your textbook. So they're not going to give you relevant facts and evidence from that you need that is relevant to this question that they're asking you. Okay, so if they're asking for the explanation of demand planning, just use what you've been given, what you've been learning in class, and along with additional research of your own. Okay, so that is going to give you the theory aspect and a well identified and a well explanation of your theory goes a long way. So take your time with it. Give a nice full explanation of demand planning. Don't rush it. Don't give a brief description. But if you have a lot of words left over to make your word count, go back and add in more theory to it. So really like build up um, that foundational understanding of what demand planning is. Okay, use a lot of examples. Okay, and then if you are able to paraphrase everything that you have included, that is also a part of the mark allocation. So if you showed that you were able to paraphrase, now the thing with definitions is that sometimes students will take a definition word for word from the textbook and then will reference it, will reference using the textbook. But you shouldn't do that. So you should take that definition and reword it entirely to your understanding. Okay. So if something is saying operations management is in charge of the transformation model, you just reword that to the importance of operations management is to overlook the processes and procedures in the transformation model or in the manufacturing process. So do you see how I didn't like I used my own words or I used different words than what my initial words were? So you want to do something along those lines, okay? And then there isn't a very clear it's very clear that you have attempted to integrate your concepts. So like I said, you need there to be a flow in your essay. You need to show there's a link between everything you're saying. That's how you know something is making sense. So think about when you are telling a story to your friends. You're not going to tell them like very different random parts of a story. You're telling them a story and you're linking everything together. So you're telling a story start from finish, and everything sort of flows into one another. Even if they didn't happen in that order, you still tell it in a way that makes sense, right? In a way that links everything together. So you do the same thing for your essay. Everything that you are explaining, everything that you are discussing, ensure that it's all linking together, that there's relevance to it, okay? And that also it ties into your introduction. So if you have something in your introduction that you aren't talking about in your essay, that doesn't show like a well-structured, integrated um, essay. So you want to just make sure that your introduction and your essay and your conclusion is all well integrated within each other. And that is your 10 marks that you get. And then we have the application part. Now, see how you are getting marked for application on each aspect. So the demand planning and the demand planning process. Okay. So don't just talk about the demand planning process and the application of that. You want to include everything you spoke about. And that's why I said sometimes it is easier to, if you have your explanation of demand planning, to just integrate your application in that after your theory, and then have the next section, which is the steps of the demand planning, and then integrate your theory, your application. Then you don't forget to apply yourself. Okay, because sometimes what happens is if you leave application for the last, you tend to forget elements that you have to add, or you forget that you have to include both. Okay. So here we are looking for application that is relevant. So like I said, you want to make sure that the application that you use does apply to Lent. It's a very, very specific about Lent and also South Africa. So even if you're doing additional research, ensure that it is South African and not a different Lent overseas or something. Again, you're able to paraphrase. So we do look for paraphrasing here. So even if you are taking words from the case study, do not take words word for word from the case study. Put those in your own words. Okay. Or if you are, always use quotation marks and use a reference, or just mention from the above case study, and so and so. Okay. And again, you've integrated everything. So the application carries 10 marks, which means it has to be an in-depth application. You can't just say Lent uses past sales data to predict their future demand. You need to actually be specific with it. Okay. And yeah, that is your whole essay, and that will get you your 25 marks. So please ensure that you reference, that there's an intro, a body, a conclusion. Set it up like that. Remember your 1,000 word count. You see how it doesn't say it in the question, but you need to remember. So make a mental note, or write it down somewhere on your paper so you know. Okay. And then the very last question. So here we are looking at explaining what is meant by a scope statement. So this is coming from the project management section. Okay, so if you guys remember project management, um, and what it entails and what a scope statement is, all you are doing again when it's asking you to explain, you need to say what is a scope statement. Okay, you can talk about its purpose, you can talk about its importance, and the second part to this question, so that is the first part. The second part to it is creating a scope for, or a scope statement for lens farming programs. Okay, so remember there's a whole segment on lens farming. So go back and see how you can create a scope statement for that. Okay, so 15 marks. We can assume the 10 marks is coming from your theory, so from the explanation of a scope statement, and your 5 marks is coming from your in-depth um, scope statement for Lent. So keep it detailed, okay? So don't just have your generic titles and leave it at that. Be specific, directly link everything you're saying in your theory to Lent. Okay, so go back to project management and look at what a scope statement is and what it entails, and then do one for Lent. And then that is your whole assignment. I feel like this is a pretty easy assignment. But please read through your questions carefully. Okay, you don't want to leave anything out, and also make sure that you are writing enough for each question. Make sure that you are referencing everything. Make these notes for yourself, guys. Like make the note of breaking down your questions, looking at describing, what does describing mean? What does differentiating mean? What is explaining? Go back to old notes and look at the proper structure of an essay because all of these things are assessed. So make sure that you are reading correctly. And then in terms of your theory, please make sure that you don't solely use additional sources, like don't only use research articles and websites. I would suggest you use your textbook and your slides and your lecture notes to form your basic answer outline. So have your basics there, like your core concepts, core explanations, definitions, and then to elaborate on that, go ahead and do additional research. Okay. Hi Josh, I see that you're here. Would you like to maybe discuss anything before we move on to the theory aspect?
I can, no, you've explained exactly what I've been telling my students, and it just so happens some of them are here. So yes, no, thank you.
Okay. Um, okay, guys, so that was the assignment. Remember, if you have any questions, please just put it in the chat box and we will go through it. I'm going to take you through some theory that you need to know. Um, Again, this is not an in-depth theory session, but it's just a refresher, just so you have just a general guideline of what you need to be looking into, and in which learning units you can find your information. Uh, yeah, more specifically, your communications and a bit of operations and your project management. Okay. So I'm gonna go through some theory. And again, if you have questions about the theory, please don't be afraid to ask in the chat box, or I always leave my email in there. So after the session, you're always welcome to ask me. Um, just give me 1 minute. You guys can actually take a 5 minute break and we'll come back at 5 past and we'll go through our theory. Okay, you guys can take a little break. Okay, everyone. So we're back, and I hope you guys had a good break. We're gonna get into some theory, just to refresh your minds. I'm not sure how far some of you are with the communication module, with sorry, with yeah, the communication chapter. But we're just gonna do like a general refresher of everything. Okay, so yeah, so what is communication? Why is it important? Why do we need effective communication? So remember, the communication chapter is very basic. So don't overthink it. Don't overanalyze. Okay, just remember, what is communication? Communication is the sharing of information. Okay. Um, for effective communication to take place, we do need we do need the receiver to give us some sort of feedback, and then we can generate feedback, and then we can send it back, and that is known as a two-way communication. Okay, so that is when communication is effective. And the reason why we need this in business is because there are many things that we need to communicate in business. Remember when we need to discuss what our goals are, what our objectives are. Maybe we're sharing ideas, maybe we're having a brainstorming session and we need to contribute to the conversation. We need to give solutions. We need to maybe with strategy planning. So all of this requires effective communication. Imagine if businesses weren't communicating well, or there was very poor listening skills or speaking skills, or no exchange of any communication of that sort. There will probably be a lot of errors made in business. So therefore, communication is very important. It forms like the basic like core strength of the business. So it is a strength. Okay, good communication is a strength. Now we have two models of communication that we look at. Okay, so we have something known as the linear model of communication, and then we have the convergence model of communication. Okay, so if we go through the linear model, you guys should always look at the word. So linear means straight. Okay, so if you think of this type of model, it goes straight. There is no two-way. Okay, so here I'm just going to show you what a linear model looks like. You have a sender, and then you have a receiver, and then you have your channel of communication. So communication is going one way in a linear model. It is not a good representation of shared understanding because we don't have the element of feedback. So feedback from if we are the sender and we are sending a message to someone, they become the receiver. Once they've received that message, they give us feedback. This shows that there is some sort of communication between the two, and shared understanding is formed. Okay, especially when the sender then sends another message to the receiver, and then it's a back and forth process. So just think about yourselves. Think about how you communicate with people. Think about if it's linear. Think about if it's the other one being convergence, which we'll go through in a minute. Okay, so this type of model, we look at a sender, we look at the receiver, and we're looking at the channel in which the message is being sent. And remember, it does not include the element of feedback. So it's not a very good representation of shared understanding, okay? Or there is no shared understanding from this because we don't have any feedback that shows that. But when we move on to a convergence model, now this type of model does show a shared understanding. So it does show that it's not a one-way stream of communication, it is a two-way stream of communication, which means there's messages being sent back from both ends, and this means that it is more effective. So this is what a convergence model would look like. We have a sender. Now, a sender sends the message. Okay, we'll send the message to the receiver. The receiver then decodes that message and then will encode a message to send back to the sender. And this process, um, it can go on. Okay, so in this type of model, we do have some sort of feedback that is coming through from the receiver, and that is how we are able to now encode a message and have that be sent back to the receiver. Okay, this is a more effective form of communication, and this is what businesses use, and this is how businesses communicate. So it is very important for us to form understandings with any stakeholder that we communicate with. Okay, so think about investors, for example. Think about your employees. Think about consumers. It is a vital point, a vital aspect to be able to have effective communication between two. And once communication is received effectively on both ends, shared understanding is reached. Okay, so from this, we can look at our communication process. So I just want to give you a general overview of what, can even just look at this, it makes it a little bit easier. So you have a sender, you have the sender encodes a message. Okay, so however, and remember the sender needs to understand or to encode a message that the receiver will understand. So you need to take into account the channel that it is going through. Maybe language could be an aspect. Also, the subject knowledge. So, does the receiver actually know what the sender is trying to convey? Okay, so those are all elements of effective communication. We aren't able to have shared understanding or effective communication without those elements first being considered when the sender is encoding a message. So think about yourself when you are telling your friend a story. You obviously are going to speak in a language that they understand, and you're obviously going to give them context to what you're saying before you actually tell them the story. So that is exactly what a communication process is like, even in the business world. You always provide context or provide some prior knowledge that the receiver should have before sending a message. So, for example, let's take a meeting. Say, for example, you got sent a Teams link, but you have no context on this Teams link. You don't know when the meeting is, you don't know a time, you don't even know the context of it. So, is it a meeting? Is it a masterclass? Is it an interview? Is it like, what is it? So, a sender, before sending that message, will always provide context or should always provide context for it to be effective communication. Okay, so you need to think about how much does the receiver actually know. Say you had a conversation about a meeting like 5 minutes ago, and then the sender sends a link, then you do have some kind of knowledge on what the link could be. Okay. But if you had not had that conversation, you probably wouldn't understand what's going on. So, to avoid that barrier to communication, we have to consider how much does the receiver know? How much context do we need to provide? And also, like, just to be specific, and the type of language that we use also needs to be considered. So the sender will then encode the message, taking all these factors into consideration, and then also a channel. So how are you sending this message? Um, Once we figure out an appropriate medium or appropriate channel, and also a channel that the receiver also um, is able to receive this message, that also, remember, promotes effective communication. So once the receiver receives this message, they will begin decoding. Now, decoding means they're breaking this message down to their understanding. If they don't understand this message, they will give feedback back to the sender. The sender will receive this feedback and generate a new message that gets sent back to the receiver. Okay, so this is how the communication process works, and it will go back and forth. Your channel can be anything. So sometimes you have more of a vocal communication. Sometimes you have communication via email. Sometimes you have like even just chatting on WhatsApp or something. This is what a general communication model looks like. So yeah, I hope that is easy to understand. It's so simple that we actually complicate it by making it sound complicated, but it's actually very simple. And if you ever get confused with it, just think about how you communicate on a daily basis and all the things you have to consider before you actually send a message, and the channel in which your message gets sent through, okay, in order for the receiver to receive it. So all of these things need to be taken into account. And then just looking at barriers to effective communication. So remember, there are different things that can get in the way of you sending an effective message or for effective communication to take place. It can be anything. It can be noise, okay? It can be intrapersonal barriers and it can be interpersonal barriers. So any of these, now these are explained a little bit more. They're broken down even further. So these are some barriers to effective communication. And these are like you need to know just the basics of this. And this is also going to help you in your assignment to understand. Remember, we're looking at lint and we're looking at barriers to effective communication in regards to lint. So read through these, have a general understanding of what types of barriers do we get, and then barriers to effective communication. It's really going to help you form um, a nice theoretical basis, and then you go into your application. Okay, so here you have, we'll go through a few of them. So badly constructed messages. Okay, information that lacks context is not always effective. Think about when you receive a text message and you have no prior knowledge to what's going on. It can be very confusing, and also it's not very productive because there's not much that you can do with little context. But if you do know, um, like what that information means, you have prior knowledge on it, you have a better chance at sending a message back or having more effective feedback. Okay, so again, a meeting with no time, no dates, no context, that is not a very good message that is constructed. Poor listening skills, so not paying attention is also a barrier. So think about when you're sitting in class and you're not actually paying attention and you have one of those moments where you drift off and then you're asked a question. It's very hard for you to respond because you don't remember what you've been told. You don't even remember what you've been talking about, which means you can't give effective feedback and there is no shared understanding that's been created. Okay, so poor listening skills can get in the way of effective communication. Also, failure to consider the receiver's needs. Okay, so say, for example, the receiver doesn't speak English. And if you are constructing a message that is in English and it's a very, very important message, maybe it's a meeting invite, and you've just sent this message through, the person that does not speak the language is not going to be able to interpret this, or it's going to take them some time to interpret this. So you may not get immediate responses, or they may not even understand that message at all, which means it wouldn't have been received. Now, things like this in a business is very risky. So if you have sent messages to or emails to employees, like important dates, important times, important links, important articles to read, things like that, and they don't understand the context, or maybe they don't really understand, like it doesn't really like benefit them in some way, or they haven't been listening in a meeting, or they have a certain attitude towards it, it's going to obstruct an effective communication flow. Okay, they're not going to be able to give you um, feedback, effective feedback, and they're also not going to be able to do whatever it is that you need them to do. So that's going to push your productivity down. And if productivity goes down, remember, profits go down. Okay, so that's a big risk that we should not be willing to take. And that's why we go through communication in such detail in business, because it is such an important aspect of it. And knowing how to communicate effectively and knowing what possible barriers there are to communication is going to help us go around those barriers and to recognize it. And then like for example, if you recognize someone does not speak a certain language, there are other ways that you can maybe communicate with them. Or if you know someone doesn't have much context on a meeting or information that you've provided, you can provide them with context. Okay. Sometimes we have poor encoding or decoding of messages. So, for example, think about yourself. Like if you sent a text message to a friend, and they sent one back to you, your perception of that message could be entirely different to what that person intended it to be. And this can also mess up communication. So think about how many times that has happened just in general life. Okay, so that is very likely to happen. I mean, someone can misunderstand a message based on how they have interpreted it. Okay, so that is something that is likely to happen. And when that happens, we also find that communication is either lost or communication is affected. Okay. Um, Inappropriate languages is also something that can obstruct good communication. So just shouting and swearing and not having any professional decorum in the way that you send a message in business, that can affect a good channel of communication. Okay. Also, sometimes people have like different attitudes. Okay. So sometimes uh, like if an employee is feeling unmotivated, they're less likely to want to communicate with you, or maybe they're ignoring your emails, or say they are behind on a few tasks. And you as a manager, you're sending like emails and reminders, feeling like them feeling pressured and them forming this attitude around what needs to be done is gonna prevent them from actually communicating effectively with you. Okay, so that can also happen. So these are just a few of the possible ways that communication can be affected. When you are doing your assignment, go through each of these barriers. Okay, read through them, get a full understanding of what each one entails, and then look at how it can be applied to Lent, or which one is most applicable. Okay, so remember you have to have five. So go back to the types of barriers, also have a general understanding of this so it can also shape your answer. And then go to the barriers of effective communication and really read through this and see which one is applicable. Okay, so for example, like remember, if we think back to the question, it asks us to be very specific and to make sure that the barrier is relevant to Lent. Okay, so you need to actually make sure that whichever ones you pick, they're very relative to Lent, and you can actually find evidence in the case study to support what you are saying. Okay, so I hope that that was clear enough and you guys have formed a general understanding of that. If you have some questions on effective communication, then just message me, or just the communication in general, the different models of communication as well. If you need more help with that, then just do message in the chat box. Remember that this session is just to give you a brief overview, just to refresh your minds. But of course, in our summative masterclass, we go into this in more detail. Okay. Moving on to looking at goods and services. So I wanted to give you guys just a brief understanding of what a good is and what a service is. Again, very, very basic stuff, but it is still good for us to understand the difference between the two. So a good, something you can actually touch, smell, feel, taste something very tangible. Okay, so it's like the table, it's like your laptop that you're using currently, it's like your textbook. A service, on the other hand, is intangible. So we cannot take it home with us. So think about when you're going to a salon, you cannot take your haircut home with you, right? So it will require you to be in the same place as the service provider for it to actually take place. Like you can't get a haircut if you are at home and your hairdresser is in the salon. It doesn't make sense, right? So you have to be in the same place at the same time in order for that to happen. So read through these differences, also have a good understanding of what each one is. It's very, very simple, very basic, but it's also easy to make mistakes when you are differentiating between them. So ensure that you know what each one means. And then moving on to our transformation model. Okay, so again, this is found in our operations management or our operations department, okay, in your operations management learning unit. Now, our transformation model, it begins with inputs. We have our transformation process, we have outputs, and then we have feedback that makes our transformation process more effective. Also, it helps in terms of quality. It helps us to align ourselves to um, like external demands and those kinds of things. Okay, so for example, we have our inputs, we transform those into a finished product. And then once that product is finished, anything that we assess at the end, so maybe there was errors at the end that we've assessed, we can put that back into our transformation models as information. Okay, so as knowledge, so that we don't repeat that same thing that caused the defects. Okay, so that's how we can improve quality. Also, the feedback can come from consumers. So sometimes consumers do give us feedback in the transformation model and how to better our services. So think about like you see different brands, although they've been established for quite some time, you see they come out with new packaging, they come out with new flavors, and they get a lot of their inspiration and a lot of the changes that they make, they get it from input from consumers. Okay, so sometimes consumers do give their feedback. Um, and this is always to make our products more convenient, more effective, better quality, all of those things. So let's break down our transformation model. Okay, so we have inputs, right? So inputs are very, very important. This is what we need in order to begin our transformation model. Now you have two types. You have transformed resources, okay, and then you have transforming resources. So again, this is how inputs can be divided. Our transformed resources is to create the specific goods or services during our transformation process. So, for example, it can be the very materials that we are using that's going to be changing its shape, its form, everything. And then we have the information that either we've received from market research, this information maybe came from consumer demands, um, maybe even from our own internal analysis. Maybe we found that our processes are not effective and we need to switch things up. So that can also be a starting point for us. Okay, and then of course, consumers, we can have their feedback as well. So these are all the resources that we can use to create specific goods or services. Then we have transforming resources and they are used in the transformation process. So, for example, we need our staff, we need people, we need employees to help facilitate the process. And then, of course, we need the physical facility and our machinery and our equipment, all of the things that help make this transformation process possible. Okay, so remember, we have both people and machinery and we intertwine those, and that is how we can make a very efficient operations design. Okay, so this is our transformation model in terms of inputs. Then let's go to looking at the overall transformation of our goods. So remember, this aspect deals with the actual transforming of our raw materials or whatever materials that we are using. So it looks into the processes, the procedures that we're following. Also, when we look at the transformation model, we can look at the physical layout of everything and how effective all of that is. So, yeah, this is the main process, and this is where our goods are actually being transformed. Okay, and again, when we get closer to the summative, we will break this down even further. And then our outputs is our finished product. Outputs can also be any waste that we've accumulated from this whole process because there can be a lot of waste that we actually accumulate. So, yeah, the finished product, the product that goes on the shelf, that is the output. And then the feedback, remember, feedback is there to help us make this process more effective. So it's to help us actually improve our quality, improve our service, improve our product, all of those things. Okay, so feedback actually makes this process very, very, or it forms a part of our quality control as well. Okay, because it helps us sometimes redesign. So if we find that our production, maybe the time that we've spent in our production process was too long, so we're not competitive anymore because we're taking too long to produce our products. That feedback can go back into our when we're designing our operations, and we can actually change things up based on that feedback to make our processes more efficient. So feedback does bring awareness to certain problems, and they don't only have to be product problems only. They can be problems with our processes. They can be, maybe there is like low productivity, those kinds of things. So feedback closes the loop, and it just helps us be more effective and more efficient. Okay, and now we get to the project management aspect. Okay, so we're just going to go through like just the basics of these concepts, which you should also know. So for example, what is a project? Okay, so I understand that you guys do a whole module on project management, so this should be easy peasy for you guys. You should know this like at the back of your hand. Okay, so a project is an organized endeavor to get a job done with a specific period. So you also have usually a very specific budget. You have a time frame. You have human resources, and you also have a quality that you try to maintain. Okay. So that is what your project is. Most projects have a start and a finish date. Okay. If not all, you will have a start and a finish date. And that is also just to help us to stay organized and to stay on track. So imagine if production, like you're producing a product and this is your project. If you didn't have a timeline or a time frame, you actually don't have a plan of action on when your product is going to be ready for delivery. So, in order for all our processes to actually be effective, even after production, like in terms of supply chain, etc., we do need to have very organized projects, and that usually starts off with a time frame, specific quality, budget, human resources. So we usually have all of those specified and planned out before we even begin a project. Okay, we have project management. So this is the manager or the management that's associated with projects. So just ensuring that we are sticking to specific performance standard, specific quality standards, looking at supporting our projects as well. Okay, imagine if you didn't have a project manager. You wouldn't really have anyone leading the project, anyone overlooking it, anyone looking or ensuring quality, those kinds of things. So your project manager is mostly there to just ensure that everything is going well, everything is going smooth, everything is aligned. Okay, and then we have Programs, so these are a collection of projects. You can also have a program manager, which is higher than a project manager and overlooks all like the collection of your projects. Okay, so this does not have a specific time period. It is an open, um, yeah, an open program. And then we do have portfolios, so a collection of programs. Okay, so please know what these are, have a general understanding, especially what a project is, know how to define a project. What is a project? Why is it important? Here's some characteristics of a project as well. And this is also nice to know and to build on your theory, especially for your assignment. These are just little things that you can add to show more of an understanding or to help you link things better with your case study as well. So, some characteristics, for example, it is aimed to get a desired result. Finding an example or something like from the case study that you can apply this to is also could also help you structure your answers. Okay. For example, projects have like certain milestones that you want to accomplish, certain deliverables, activities, tasks. Okay, those are very specific. So you can look into your in your project management questions, you can look into your case study and you can look at what about Lint is specified in terms of the tasks that they have to complete, the activities, the deliverables, what is their aim, what is their time frame, those kinds of things. Okay. Um, Also scope and complexity. So if you also go back to the case study, all of these points, if you can find application to all of these points, it'll also be nice to help you with your answer to formulate your answer. Okay, so you can take the theory and you just have to say, how does this apply to Lent? So, what is the project that's involved here? What are the timeframes? What are the budget specifications? What are the quality specifications? What are the deliverables? What are the activities? And that is how easy it can actually be. So, yeah, just go through this theory. Here we have project categories that we have. So, different categories. We have manufacturing, we have we have management projects, research projects, development projects. Read through these and have a full understanding. So, the manufacturing project is production of a piece of equipment, vehicle, or other items. Um, Management project arises when an organization develops and introduces new projects. Our research projects are projects which aim to extend our current scientific knowledge and theories. So these are more like research based. And development projects is projects used as means to improve the socio-economic issues that we have. So yeah, like maybe we have corporate social responsibility, those kinds of things. Okay, so these are different categories, and I'm sure like from first semester as well, you can pick up on like different learning units that we've been through where we have looked into uh different aspects that can be projects. For example, corporate social responsibility, if you remember back to that. um Even in terms of management projects, in terms of manufacturing. Okay, this semester you should know a lot about manufacturing. So, yeah, understand these project categories. Remember, I told you how production can also be a project. Okay, so understand these, know how to apply them. So, also, if you go back and just look, like, try to find examples for each. When you're going through this theory, look for examples of each thing to help you with your understanding. Even when you're studying for a test or an exam, whenever you're going through your theory, always look like, how could I possibly apply this to a business? You know, that will help you with your learning. Okay, and then to quickly go through some elements here uh, in regards to demand planning. So this forms part of your supply chain management learning unit. Okay, very important. Now remember, we looked at the four basic functions, and this was in your test as well. So the four basic functions of supply chain management: purchasing, operations, logistics, and integration management. Okay, so those are our four. So under operations, that is where we have demand planning. Now, remember I told you when we're going through some questions, I told you that demand planning starts with a forecast, and a forecast is basically just a prediction of what is likely to happen. Okay, so organizations can look into, maybe they can use past sales and they can predict, okay, so maybe in like in the Christmas period of 2024, this is what our sales look like, and this is what it can look like for 2025, and you base that on factual evidence. So what is showing, um like these like what are the certain sales, what are the specifics of that? So um, yeah, it always starts off with that, like a general forecast. And the demand plan is the planning of this, the planning of that information that we've received from a forecast. So if you do know that, okay, this was my past sales, I'm using historical data from 2024, 2023, we can start to forecast, and then from this we can start to demand plan. So I want to take you through the different steps that we do get in our demand planning process. So firstly, we can use our past sales data. Like I said, past sales data is very nice, especially if you have it over a few years, sometimes just 5 years or even 3 years. You can start to form a pattern, and that is how you can make a prediction. So if you know in the past 3 years at Christmas, our sales went up, you can make a prediction of what's the demand in a certain category, what it would be like this Christmas. Okay. Now, remember, it can change. Just because you have that forecast does not mean it's set in stone. Forecasts can change. Remember, it's just a prediction of what's likely to happen. So even when we are demand planning, so when we are planning using our information from forecasts and um, just historical information and those kinds of things, there is a risk of it not actually being accurate. So just keep that in mind. Step two, so we work with consumers to determine when demand will increase and by how much. So it's always important to look at our demand when it comes to operations. And you may be wondering why. Why is it so important? Because either way, the production process goes on. But when we look at demand, we know how much we actually need, or a target. Okay, so let's just put it that way. We know a target. Remember, you don't want to oversupply and you don't want to undersupply. So you want to supply to meet your demand, to meet your customers' expectations. So if there's a very high demand and you have not planned for that, you have no idea that there's such an increase in demand, you haven't done your research, um, you haven't found any other information or haven't done any forecasts, you will not be able to supply that demand, which means the possibility of losing consumers is quite high, or the possibility of your consumers actually going to competitors is quite high. So demand planning helps us align ourselves to our customer market and what are their expectations and how can we satisfy them so that we're always meeting those expectations. Okay. So we always want to do that. We want to work with consumers. And that's why even when we looked into marketing last semester, if you remember, we always looked at the importance of consumers and the importance of their feedback, and why it's important to do our market research and look into demand and look into um, how much consumers are buying or consumer behavior in general. Okay, because that's also going to help us in our demand planning process. And then step three, we manage and we combine our forecasts. So we take all the information, we combine it. So we've done forecasts. Okay, so we know what's likely to happen. We have done planning now. we have a plan of action, and then we re-examine the data. So remember, like I said, it's not set in stone. A forecast, information within a forecast can change. We don't know for a fact that this is going to happen, but it is a likelihood. So we have to go back and re-examine our data, and especially because we have external forces that are constantly changing, that are constantly affecting our business, we need to always re-examine our data to ensure that it's relevant, to ensure that it's effective, and it's applicable to the market we're trying to cater for. So this is our demand planning process, and it's so important because it looks into it takes into account all our internal and external factors that could have an impact on customer demand as well. So it also helps us assess what are some things that could possibly affect consumer behavior, or in this case, consumer demand. Okay, so we can plan for that because remember, to plan ahead of risks is it's so important, especially in business, okay, to safeguard yourself in that way, to have contingency plans. So yeah, this demand planning is very strategic, and it does ensure that production is aligned well to demand, and that is why we do it. So know your theory on this, please. And then also, it's nice to actually do additional research on demand planning. So go ahead and look at research articles, go and look at what articles have been written on demand planning. Go and look at the way they've conceptualized this, the way that they discuss it. Um, it's really nice because it also just increases your understanding of it, and it also provides you with more insights. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to look at very, very briefly again is an aspect of project management, being our project scope management. So this aspect deals with the planning. Now, planning, as we've just um, looked into, is very important. Okay, so planning helps us be more prepared. It also helps us to align ourselves and to ensure that every detail, every task, every activity, all of that is done well and according to performance standards, according to quality standards, according to budget, all of those things, because those are important elements of project management. Okay, you can't, in business, you can't take a chance with a project and just conduct the project without having information on what will this project actually cost me? Is it feasible for me to do this? Um, what is the scope of my project? Like, what am I actually doing? So, project scope management does deal with looking at the description of the scope of the project itself. So, what exactly is my project? Okay, what am I doing? What is the product acceptance criteria? So, what is the criteria for this? Yeah, like what are the specifications that I should have? Sometimes even there are like specific standards. You can think about like quality, all of those things can also be discussed in here. Project deliverables. So, what is the outcome of this? Like, what is my end goal? That also should be planned. Okay. Project exclusions. Um, what am I trying to avoid? What is like, yeah, like anything that I need to be um like, excluding those kinds of things. And then project constraints. So maybe you have time constraints, maybe you have budget constraints. Those need to be elaborated on. Like I said, budget is so important, and as time is very important as well. So if you take too long to manufacture a product, for example, by the time it reaches the customer market, they don't want the product anymore because the demand is gone. So yeah, project constraints is really nice because it allows you to plan. It allows you to look at all these different things. Budget, cost, quality, all of those things are important. So identifying the constraints around them is really going to help you make this project very effective. And then project assumptions as well. So Yeah, also just looking at the possible assumptions surrounding this project. Now, again, I'm going to go through these in detail closer to your summative. I just wanted to just refresh your mind on, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this chapter quite well because of your module with project management. But I just wanted to give you an overview of the theory so that it can help you with your assessment and also so you know what to look into, um, and you know like the theory and the how to form a basis for your answers. So just to quickly go back, remember guys, please always reference. It is so important to reference. Do not take, well, you should try to stay away from using direct quotes. If you really can't and you really need to put a direct quote, try to make it just one. Use quotation marks and reference that appropriately, please. And yeah, if you can stay away from that, please do. And always paraphrase. Please don't just change one word in the sentence and think it is paraphrased. You need to change quite a few words. Okay, so you need to put it in entirely your words, but obviously still have it making sense. So I use the example of if you're defining, if you're saying project or operations management, um, it over or operations managers overlook the transformation model. Putting that into your own words, you could say the importance of operation managers is to facilitate the processes in the manufacturing process. Okay, that is a way that you can rephrase that line. So do that for all your information. I know that for some it can be a bit difficult. It can seem a bit complicated, but you need to do that, and you also need to reference everything that is not yours. Okay, so if it is not your idea, you need to reference it. So majority of your assignment needs to be referenced because a majority of it is theory, and then your application as well. If you are taking examples that is drawn from theory, so yeah, if you're using something from like an article, research article, or a website, you need to reference that. Okay, so remember, don't say, "Oh, this definition came from my head, from high school. Like, how do I reference that?" No, that definition came from somewhere. You know that knowledge from somewhere. So you need to go back and um, you need to have credible sources. You are not a credible source. You cannot say, I just know what the definition of a project scope management is. You need to actually find information to make that statement credible. Okay. So that's why I'm saying go to journal articles. I hope that you guys are okay with everything that we did today. Is there anything in the assignment that you do want me to go back on before we close? Anything that you need me to elaborate more on? Um, are you having, perhaps you're having like an issue interpreting a question, something of that sort? Is everyone okay? Josh, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, thanks, Kim. No, but no, thank you so much for this.
Okay, welcome. Everyone else, I am gonna leave my email in the message box. Okay, so if you do need assistance. If you are confused about a question, you don't know how to interpret it, you can always reach out and I will assist you. Okay. Is everyone okay? No questions? Okay, so my email is in the chat box. Okay, reach out to me. Don't be shy. Okay, guys. Well, yeah, good luck in starting your assignment. You will be fine. Just read your instructions, paraphrase, reference, read your questions carefully, break those questions down into little bits, highlight where necessary so that you know how to answer. Okay, if it's asking you to explain and then discuss, you need, or sorry, like identify and discuss, break that down, identify, and then elaborate on it, and then provide an example. Okay? So if you just walk like that, and if you keep walking like that with each question, you should be fine. But of course, I'm always here to help you, and so are your lecturers. Okay? So don't be afraid to ask questions, guys. And thank you so much for coming. And don't forget that this is recorded. So if you do need it, it will be available on the YouTube channel. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Josh, for staying.
No, thank you.
Okay, guys. See you at the next masterclass.